welcome to episode 9 of Missile Industries BMW E30 M30 long-term track day missile project. Now today we're going to talk about Purple Tag steering racks. Now if you're an E30 enthusiast, you'll know exactly what that's all about, but you might be unsure about the best way to go about doing the conversion. And on today's episode I'm going to go through the steps of making 3 turns lock power steering rack a reality in an E30. Now you'll find that the stock E30 power steering rack will be 4 turns lock to lock, and to be perfectly frank, that's poo. And you can upgrade to an E36 steering rack, which is 3.2 turns lock to lock, but the later model E46s did come out with the 3 turns lock to lock steering rack, which I've got here on the bench, in pretty plentiful numbers for that model. So they're pretty easy to find, and they're a relatively straightforward swap for your E30 as long as you follow some pretty basic steps. Now what I have here is obviously the Purple Tag rack. They have this name because they have this purple tag on them. Zoom up for the number there. Now these are virtually identical to the E30 rack in terms of their structure. All you need to do is add some E36 tierod ends to get it to the right width, because obviously the E46 ones are going to be far too long, and you'll need to modify this joint here. When it's time to do your steering coupler, you need to remove this big flared rubber coupling, because since this is further inboard compared to the E30, the steering coupler kicks in at more of an angle like that, which means this big wide flaring piece here has a better chance of smacking into exhaust manifolds and bits and bobs like that. So that bit there needs to go. And what I found when I did my conversion is I got a couple of spaces like that, substituted those into there, and it gave me the correct offset to make this whole thing work. The other thing you need to do is use spacers in between the rack and the crossmember, because the E30 steering racks, this is much deeper, so the E46 rack needs to use spacers to adapt it to be the right thickness for the E30 crossmember. Now, if you're insane, you could try the manual steering block-off plates that I initially tried with my first conversion of one of these, because I assumed it would be okay as long as I was driving the car. But it turned out to be shit, because a power steering rack is not a manual rack, and as soon as you put the block-off plates in it, you are just fighting the fluid that's in the system, trying to push the fluid through gaps that it's supposed to be pumped through. So whatever you do, don't do that. Next up, we'll go through one I prepared earlier to show you how it all bolts together. As you can see from the one I prepared earlier, that is the factory E30 steering coupler with the spacers bolted into it to maximize my clearance. Now this exhaust system's actually been modified to suit this rack conversion, because as I said earlier, the rack does kick over more towards the center of the car than the E30 one does. I have retained my factory M30 pump and the factory E30 reservoir. There's no reason to deviate from either of those things, because you can get line kits that will pretty much bolt your E46 steering rack to whatever pump you have available. You just got to get the AN fittings for it. This steering rack actually has a custom line kit and AN fitting kit for it. They're readily available through private suppliers. This conversion is so popular, there are many different versions of the line kit available. The reason you need a line kit is because the ports for the E46 rack are different to the ports for the E30 rack, so the hard lines for the E30 cannot be used. So it's best to go with the custom line kit, and that solves all your problems. As you can see there, that's the Purple Tag rack installed. If you look carefully up into there, you can see the aluminium spacers on top of the steering rack to space the steering rack out correctly in relation to the subframe. You can also see I've used the furthest out holes to bolt the steering rack into. This gives you the best options for geometry and space to work with your hard lines. So that's what I would recommend. And finally, the undercar view. You can see there the E36 tierods work perfectly fine with the E30 struts. As you can see there, those are the custom fittings for the E46 rack to E30 conversion. It's a kit very much worth your while. If you want very super responsive steering feedback, these racks are great. So the summary for my Purple Tag rack episode: get a Purple Tag rack. They're great. They allow you to steer your way out of situations you would otherwise be crashing out of. And that's a pretty important thing to have if you're going to drive your E30 as close to the limit as you possibly can. Because the last thing you want is to go into a skid and it takes too long for your steering to respond to what you're telling it to do, which leads to crashing. Crashing's no fun. Mad skids are fun, crashing no fun.